Hello, and welcome to another edition of Talkin' Tunes. I am your host, Frank Walsh. Thanks for turning in today. So, folks, I have a great show for you. I have a musician who is masterful at the guitar. He has enough stories to fill the Empire State Building. He has an incredible background. He is going to be releasing a CD, which we're going to talk a lot about today. And he is just a great guy. I've known him probably since the beginning of this pandemic, and we bonded like we've known each other for a long time. He is a North Shore guy, hoping to get down here to the South Shore and play for some of the people around here. He surrounds himself with fantastic musicians, and you are going to learn a little bit today about my great guest and friend, Mr. Bob Woflman. So, Bobby, welcome aboard, man. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Frank. Delighted.
You're welcome.
Grateful to be here.
You're welcome. I mean, you've been a busy boy, man. You've done a lot of TV things. You've done a lot of interviews, and hopefully I can mix it up a little bit. You're probably sick and tired of saving the same old things. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to let the folks at home and let you know a little bit of some of the things that I know about you, and you can jump in and correct me if I'm wrong. But I want to bring you up to a point that was kind of the turning point in your life that made you become the musician you are and take the direction in the life that you have taken. So if I'm correct, you're a New York guy.
Indeed.
You were born a small child. I mean, you wanted to be, you were born in a hospital because you wanted to be near your mother.
Mm-hmm.
And somewhere around 4 years old, 5 years old, you took up the clarinet of all things. You've got a little bit of a classical background. And then all of a sudden you started hearing some of the 60s music, and some of these people came along. Somebody named maybe Clapton, Jeff Beck, Jimi Hendrix, and you said, you know what, I'm going to put this clarinet down and I'm going to pick up the guitar. So you started playing like a madman. After school, you'd come home, get into that garage. You and your buddies would practice and play like hell. The next thing,
correction already, not to interrupt, but
go ahead.
I grew up in an apartment building in the Bronx in New York City, so we didn't have
okay.
We did have basements, though. We had basements. We spent a lot of time playing music in basements.
In the basements.
And people's living rooms and even bedrooms. Imagine 10 guys crammed into a bedroom the size of your bathroom.
Wow.
I mean, 10 guys with big amps, custom amps, with the metallic vinyl cushioning like you have in diners. And Sound Cities, big Fender basement amps, dual Showman amps, full drum sets, electric keyboards, Wurlitzer or Fender Rhodes, full drum kit, and like 3 guitars in a bedroom. This is true.
Now, did you just learn by practicing, or did you take lessons? Any formal training behind you for guitar?
Well,
I know later on down the line you went to school, but when you started playing.
No, I was totally an ear player. I learned by playing along with records like most of my heroes did, most great guitar players. Whenever you read interviews, I mean, Clapton used to sleep on the floor and play along with blues records all day when he was living with John Mayall, with the Blues Breakers era. I mean, Jeff talked about that, about how he played along with records, with Scotty Moore and the Gallup and, all the guys from the late 50s rock and roll, early 60s.
Mm-hmm.
No, I was an ear player. When I got home from school every day, I would put on, like you mentioned, Jeff Beck, God, that I spend hours trying to cop Jeff's licks, and Jimmy, of course, Clapton, Duane Allman, B.B. King, Buddy Guy, Mike Bloomfield, one of my favorites of all time. I mean, all the greatest guitarists that I wanted to emulate. I'd spend all afternoon, evening. I should have been doing my homework more, but I got by. I got A's sometimes. But I was obsessed. I mean, I would just stay up all night long with my old garage turntable with the pennies or nickels duct taped to the tone arm. Because you wear out the records, the grooves on the records, so the tone arm would just skate.
Wow.
Right across the record. So you had to find the groove where the lick started that you wanted to learn. Let's say it was Clapton with Cream on something like I'm So Glad, remember? boom, boom. Jack Bruce comes in, boom, 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 and Clapton be going. But he'd do those real fast licks. You know? So I would have to find the exact location on the record, the very part of the groove, literally. I'm not talking, groove to be musicians lingo. To find the exact spot where the lick started. Now, when we had cassette tapes, I was like, this is so great, because you had these custom decks made. They were more expensive, but they were worth it. You could press a button to create a tape loop to start the lick and end the lick, and then it would automatically rewind, 100 times. So you could just practice that lick. So I wore out my records. I still have most of my old phonograph albums. Listen to me. 33 1/3 LPs, vinyl, in the jackets. Cream, Chess Records. With everybody. Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf and Bloomfield and Al Cooper. The Fathers and Son album, remember?
Yeah,
I have Rhinoceros. I have all my old Jeff Beck albums. Of course, I have all Jimmy's records. I have a box of my albums in my basement to this day. And when I rarely take them out to show friends or my students, they're like, how come the record's all gray? It's not black. I said, do they make them like that? I said, no, that's from the wax. The grooves.
You wore them out.
I'm not kidding you. It's really true.
I think you and I are going to have to do a show and tell one of these days. I mean, I was I was kind of cloistered when I was in high school, and music was my thing. And like, you'd come home and play the guitar. I would come home literally and get home at 3 o'clock and lock myself in my room and play records all night.
Right.
And weekends, I'd come home on a Friday afternoon, and 3 o'clock, I'd be in my room. I'd come out to eat and go to the bathroom and go back in my room in the entire weekend. So I've got, you talk about boxes. I mean, I think I have, at last count, I had 3,000, 4,000 LPs going back into the 50s.
Yeah.
And I got about 5,000 45s.
The wooden crates when you go to the old days?
The old pop bottles and all that stuff.
But I'm talking about stuff for fruit, for produce, for fruits and vegetables. Like I don't know if they even use those anymore. I think they use wood. It's probably too expensive.
Probably.
But when I was a kid, right up until I was in my 30s or 40s, they still had those crates for fruits and vegetables, for produce.
Yep.
And I had a teacher that worked for me. He's a South Shore guy, Steve Tapper. He was when I had my brick and mortar, when I had Wolfman School of Music on Mass Ave in Allington, as the natives say. I had a brick and mortar school. We had like 1,000 students. I had 35 instructors working for me. My favorite instructor, Steve Tapper, I went to his house for dinner one night. I think he lived in Watertown at that time. And he had a huge living room in an old-fashioned apartment building, like the type that I grew up in. I mean, this living room was like the size of a whole apartment nowadays. It was huge.
Wow.
No exaggeration. Floor to ceiling, every single square inch of wall space. And these were high ceilings, Frank. You're talking like 8.5 feet, 9-foot ceilings, maybe even 10 foot. He had those wooden crates stacked up, one above the other, like 8 or 10 of them in a column, covering every single inch of wall space. With the exception of the windows, all he had was record albums.
Unbelievable.
He told me he had like 45 to 50,000 record albums. I mean, he had more.
Living room.
Yeah, he had more than like his master's voice. Remember HMV, the music stores, the Strawberries? He probably had more records. It's unbelievable. So my point is, I grew up with a lot of people like that. You asked me how I got started. I grew up in a really musical neighborhood. The next building, I don't know if you ever heard of Arlen Roth.
I know the name.
Arlen grew up in the next building. Arlen's a phenomenal guitar player. He was probably better than Clapton when he was 15, 16 years old.
Wow.
And this isn't just the perception of a 15-year-old kid. When we used to play up in the mountains in the Catskills in upstate New York in the summers, every time we played, somebody would walk up and hand him a record contract when he was a teenager, right? Wow. So I had that. In his building, we had Donnie Sinkoff, phenomenal drummer, who had the coolest Jaguar XKE, gray convertible with the black rag top, red leather interior. He never let me drive it, almost one night. Across the street, we had Paul, whose father was a professional drummer. He was a bass player. Every weekend, he'd get in his car, drive up to the mountains, and play gigs up in the Borscht Belt, So that was just on my street. And then we had other people on my street, which kind of aren't worth mentioning. But we had so much talent in my neighborhood. So many people that became really big-name musicians. I mean, world famous. Do you know Mike Turk Richards, a harmonica player?
I know the name,
Turk.
not well.
Grew up in my neighborhood. I played many, many times with him. My friend Mitch Colby, who's designing and building Park amplifiers now. Well, his own amps, Mitch Colby. He was the vice president corporate for Korg Musical Instruments. Phenomenal guitar player. I was Larry Coryell's protege. He was Barry Galbraith, one of the world famous jazz guitarists. I never appreciated him until I was like just a few years ago. I never appreciated what a brilliant, amazing, genius guitar player his mentor Barry Galbraith was. But Mitch became the vice president of Korg Musical Instruments worldwide. They make keyboards and all kinds of electronic devices for music. So now he's building amps that basically replicate the Plexi Marshall that Jimmy Page used in the first two Led Zeppelin albums. They're good friends now. They're best of friends.
Nice.
He's making the most incredible amps. So this was the environment I grew up in. And then when I got into high school, I started doing studio work in Manhattan. Not for big name people, but I was a sideman. I was basically playing like B.B. King type blues licks, for these singers that were doing like Motown and R&B type stuff, Al Green and Otis Redding type music, which I loved and still do very much to this day. But I got to meet all the big name studio musicians in New York City. I'm a spoiled brat because they mentored me. They were like my big brothers. They were all 5, 7, 8, 10, 12 years older than me.
Right.
And they treated me like a peer. They helped me every way they could. They got me gigs. They taught me so much about the business. I got to go to recording sessions at all the biggest studios, all the record labels in New York City. I'd be on stage with them sitting in. They'd let me sit in all the time. I mean, Joe Beck, my first mentor. I mean, I could go on for days, not just hours.
I'm sure.
But the point is, I was an ear player, though. I played along with records and with friends, and I learned everything I could that way. I was very stubborn about getting a formal music education. I'm sorry. What's that?
No, go ahead. There's a little delay there. Go ahead. Now,
my parents.
When you started playing, how easy or difficult was it for you to learn? Was it something that came naturally to you, or did you really have to work very hard at it to, note by note by note? I mean, how easy or difficult was it?
Well, there's three aspects to this. One, people have told me my whole life I have a lot of musical talent and ability. I like to think so that's true. Okay. When I was in the 6th grade, I got handpicked by this Nazi. Okay. My music teacher in junior high school, his name was Mr. G. He came to my 6th grade class and took 25, 30 of us into a room in the back of the classroom individually and had us tap out rhythms and sing, melodies and duplicate things and, play things on our instrument, which at that time I was just starting to get into guitar, but I was terrible. The point is I was hand-selected out of all the kids in my school to go into the orchestral music program in junior high. So 7th, 8th grade, I was in the OM class, 7-1-8-1. 9th grade, he threw me and another kid out of the class. We went from 7-8-1 to 9-14. And it's really screwed up, right? In my junior high school, they did the numbering from the smartest and most talented kids in the school to the rejects, the drug addicts, the criminals, the kids that were doing B&Es, like breaking into Woolworths at night and stealing slot cars, which was very popular in those days, remember? I had kids in my...
I didn't think I told anybody that. How did you know that?
Well, in any event, I'm getting protractive. My ADD is showing here. Excuse me. The bottom line is I played clarinet in junior high school. I hated it. Right. I didn't like it. And then I had to switch to the oboe. I was breaking reeds like every other day. They're really expensive. I mean, like $4, $8 for one reed. I was breaking them. There was a lot of money back in those days, 1960s. So I wanted to get into guitar. My parents weren't thrilled with the idea. Beatles, Rolling Stones, and I'd come home from school in the afternoon, and you had Shindig and Hullabaloo and Dick Clark's American Bandstand.
Yep.
And then you had Solid Gold. You had all these music programs. But before Jimmy and Clapton and Jeff Beck, you had the Dave Clark Five, and you had who was it? Paul Revere and the Raiders. Remember Fang? He'd flip his guitar over. And it was
sure.
He put the tape on the back.
Anyway. I met Paul Revere one time. He was crazy as a loon.
Yeah, he was a character. I got to meet him one day too. One of Murray the K's cousin Brucey's shows in New York City. They used to put on these really big rock shows. So in any event, I was completely self-taught. I got into the guitar, tried to learn things from friends like Arlen, and I got a couple of books, but I regret it as I got older and more mature and more sensible. I should have really taken music education more seriously in a formal way. My parents wanted me to learn music on the guitar, to learn to read music, so they got me this guy, Nick Kalish. The guy would show up as a ascot, his little Harris tweed jacket, his hair all greased back. He was a pit musician. He played mainly for like Broadway shows and TV and radio, 1940s, 50s, 60s. Really nice guy. But he'd show up. I always smelled the little nip on his breath, right? Like he had a little flask in his vest pocket.
Sure.
He probably needed it to put up with me for an hour. But I worked on like Cocktails for Two, all this real straight stuff, really super corny. And all I wanted to play was, Clapton and B.B. King and real diehard blues and rock. And I'm like, this is so lame. 6 months later, he tells my parents, I have nothing left to teach him.
Wow.
He said, your son's super talented. My father's like, what's wrong with this guy? You know what I mean? Yeah. So he said he's outgrown me. I mean, there's nothing left to teach him. He reads well. He plays well. He's got a great ear. He picks everything up very quickly. So you asked me, did I learn stuff note for note? The answer is yes. I mean, if I put on a Jeff Beck record and I wanted to learn a solo, I had to learn it note for note. So like I said earlier, I had to keep trying to find that exact groove, that part of the record where he's going. That was sloppy as hell, but the point is, that's an actual lick that I started to learn when I was like 15.
Now, could you play Jeff Beck's "We Ended as Lovers"?
I sure can.
Oh, you don't have to do it, but that's my favorite of his. That's what really hooked me on him. Well, now I'm going to jump ahead. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit, and then I'm going to bring you. Oh yeah, there it is. There it is.
Sounds like crap. My guitar's going.
Who wrote that? Who did he steal that? Who did Jeff steal that from?
Stevie Wonder wrote that. Stevie
Wonder, yeah, great lyrics to that song too. There you go. Now I'm going to jump ahead a little bit, and then I'm going to bring you back a little bit. Now, at one point, talking about formal education, you decided that you wanted to go, as you call it, the Berkeley School of Music.
Don't tell people.
We say that affectionately.
Right, of course. Well,
talk that up.
What would you like to know about Berkeley?
You went to Berkeley. Talk about that. Give me a little brief thing. Give me a little brief on that.
After touring for a few years, in Europe or all over the place, Greece, Israel, Scandinavia, I played with a lot of, my favorite musician friends in blues, rock, and jazz, and made some good money and had a great time and sure learned a lot. So I come back to New York City, and there's a terrible recession going on. My dad, God bless him, was a drill instructor, Master Sergeant, stripes. Drill instructor in the Army Air Force in World War II. He flew bombing missions over Hitler's oil fields, bombed Hitler's oil fields in World War II, which has nothing to do with this story here, except I'm very proud of that, so I like to throw it in whenever possible.
All right.
The point is, my dad was out of work for the first time in his life since he got out of the Army Air Force in World War II. He worked as an architect in New York City straight through. It was a terrible recession going on. My dad was out of work for 9 months. He was really depressed. I never saw him depressed in his whole life. Not like that. So the point is, there was certainly no work to be had for me as a musician in New York City. There was no work. Everything dried up within weeks. There was no recording sessions. There was no gigs. There was nothing happening. It was really depressing, very frustrating. So I was supposed to come to Boston to go to Berkeley right out of high school. I had the paperwork done, all filled out. My parents wanted to get rid of me. They were going to pay my tuition, which was nothing back in those days. I mean, nothing. It was dirt cheap. But my friends, all my big name friends said, do you want to go to college or do you want to come tour, play your favorite music and make a lot of money with us playing great music? So the rest is history, as they say. The answer, I went on the road. So anyway, there's a bad recession going on. And I said, I guess it's now or never. So I packed up and moved to Beverly Hills, that is. I moved to Boston.
You should write those things down. You should write those little catch things down. They might catch on. Like it's now or never. I mean, maybe Elvis you could give that to Elvis.
Mm-hmm.
And you can make a movie out of the other one. I think that might
have
a
movie. But look how poker face you are when you're telling me this. You're so deadpan, so straight face.
It was a little, I'd like you. I was, I never played in the Catskills, Hey, just because I'm not a mushroom doesn't mean I'm not a fun guy, right?
Oh boy, are you the one who told that joke? You're the one. Are you the one who always tells the story? You told that joke to Henny Youngman?
No, I stole it from him, and he was glad to get rid of it.
No, but somebody told me. I think it was you. They said they told that joke to one of the Borscht Belt comedians, and they didn't think it was funny at all. I think it was. And that's the joke, the fun guy thing.
I believe that.
I take my wife everywhere. She finds her way home.
She always comes back. I know. But anyway, the clock is ticking here, unfortunately. So let's get to two quick things. One, and let's keep it a little bit brief, and we could go on forever. But you used to hang around a record store. You and your buddy used to go there a lot.
Not a record store, a music store.
Music store. Okay, a music store. And then one day, you and your buddy ran into some guy, kind of a guitarist.
Yeah, I think.
You know anything about that?
Yeah, I think he played a little bit. I think the name of the music store was on Music Row on 48th Street, Manhattan. It's called Manny's Music, biggest music equipment retailer on the planet at the time.
Yeah.
And the owner was a character. And it was a Friday afternoon. My friend and I used to get down to Music Row. We'd take the subway train down to Manhattan, 48th Street, often, like almost every other week. We'd go on Friday afternoons. It was closing time, 5:30. I can still hear the security gates rolling down like it's happening this minute. I can still hear clunk, 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 clunk.
Right.
And with the drum counter talking to Mickey, who looked exactly like Keith Richards, same hair, earring, teeth, same clothes, unbelievable. He looks over to the front door, and he just goes, "Oh, there's Jimmy." And I'm like, "What's he talking about?" And I look, and oh my God, it's Jimmy, right? And it was Hendrix.
As in Hendrix, right?
Yes, as in Hendrix, James Marshall. He basically floated, I mean literally floated, like sauntered, just floated like he was on roller skates to the back of the store, where the owner had 3 white Fender Stratocasters strewn across the display counters, his glass display counters. So I'm being the impetuous, curious, pain in the butt teenager I was, I'm like, So I kind of wander over there. I go down this aisle. There's always guitars, and there's drum sets up there, and amps and everything. So I go back there, and I'm listening in on the conversation, eavesdropping. And the owner was literally like, remember W.C. Fields, the old movies? He's like, go away, Sonny. You draw flies. You bother me. Go away. Exactly that type of vibe.
I went to Philadelphia once. It was closed.
Right, exactly. But I was very impetuous and oblivious, and, I didn't care. So they were talking about hot wiring, customizing the pickups to make them more responsive, more powerful. Now, in summer camp, for the previous few summers, I'd already learned how to make, like, radios. I took an electronics class.
Right.
Like 3 days a week, I was in there for hours wiring, solder jockey, wiring up radio chassis to shortwave radios, AM, FM radios, and even not a color TV, a black and white TV. So I learned electronics. So I was already doing it. So I butt in, I start making comments and stuff, and Jimmy's like, and the owner's really getting ticked off too. Jimmy didn't care. Jimmy put his hand over my shoulder, you know what I mean? And he starts talking, and then he pivots on the heel of his shoe, and he turns, and we just start heading towards the front of the store, completely ignores the owner of the store. And my friend comes running over with us. We leave the store, we get down 48th Street, and Jimmy took us out to dinner for a steak dinner at a local steakhouse restaurant.
Now, obviously, that was the point that changed your musical life. And for the sake of time, we could talk a lot more about that night. But you have a big event coming up, and we would be remiss not to talk about that in the next 3 or 4 minutes. You have a CD release coming out, and to my understanding, that CD is critically acclaimed by some of the most harshest critics and raving all about it. So you have that CD release party, and talk a little bit about that in the next, we got 2 minutes or so. Talk about that.
Wait, 2 minutes? We can't do that? Has
I
it
know.
been half an hour
Well,
already?
I told you, Bob. This could only be part one of part two. We'll come back and do part two.
Has it been 30 minutes already, really?
It has.
Wow. Well, I got to get to my boxing, my training today anyway, but I still have some time. Anyway, so bottom line, I just finished an album. When Jimmy passed, I swore I was going to do a tribute album to him.
Right.
Something always came up year after year, decade after decade. I got married, I had kids, I opened my music school, time problems, money problems. I was touring, I was on the road, whatever it was. So finally, in time for Jimmy's 50th anniversary, I was going to do the album. So we started the project, but then COVID hit. So we got it out in time for his 51st anniversary. Say that fast 3 times. So bottom line, the name of the album is called Tribute to a Friend. And I should have a copy to show you. Should I go grab a copy?
Well, we're gonna put some stuff up on the screen when we edit this. We're gonna put your contact information and how people can get a hold of you and all that stuff.
Anyway, the album's called Tribute to a Friend. It took 2 years in the making. Produced by John Butcher, the one and only. I think John's the #1 purveyor of Jimi Hendrix music on the planet. I don't think there's anybody more knowledgeable, more experienced, or more talented, or more equipped and skilled to do it. An amazing job. We're going to do a CD release party on March 27th. It's about 2 weeks away, barely.
Sunday afternoon.
It's 5 p.m. at Breakaway, Route 1 North in Danvers, Massachusetts. 5 p.m. early show. All ages, by the way. You can bring your kids. You can bring kids of all ages. Adolescents, toddlers, teenagers, whatever, and even people like Frank Walsh, are allowed.
Well, you know that I'm going to be there with my little gaggle of friends.
I hope so. Bring a big gaggle, the more the merrier. So on drums, you have Barry Litt, who's an amazing drummer. He nailed every tune on my record. I mean, it's just people got to hear it to believe it. My main man, who I've been working with for almost 20 years, my really close friend, Bruce Mattson, former member of Greg Allman's band, plays with Willie J. Laws also, Mattson Medeiros band. Bruce is a phenomenal keyboard player, incredibly versatile, incredibly talented. And a bass player was going to be Ronnie Belbin. Ronnie had surgery a few weeks ago, so he's recuperating, thank God. He's doing well. But we have Jeff Bates on bass, subbing for Ronnie. And Jeff also has played with so many people.
Right.
Barry Litt, my drummer's played with members of Steely Dan. And Jeff has worked with all big names throughout New England for the last 40-something years. Phenomenal bass player. Yep. So myself on guitar and vocals, of course. We may have some surprise guests dropping in. I can't mention their names because they have other gigs that weekend and, out of respect.